Hello, everyone. I'm Joshua, and next.
You know, Joshua, I think you just need to let me take over from the beginning here. So this is Joshua, Al, and Steve with our, I don't know, fifth Uncommon Sense. And Joshua is on vacation, but was gracious enough to come along, and he has a lousy internet connection. He's at
I'm back.
He's back. Okay. So, Joshua, while you got a decent connection, introduce yourself in a few seconds. It'll go to me, then I'll give it to Steve, who's our host today.
All right. Hi. Yes, hi, I'm Joshua Barnes, and as Al mentioned.
It's got really. Okay, that's okay, because we could keep going. We planned for this. If he goes out, he'll come in and out. This might end up being a conversation mostly with Steve and myself. I'm with the PMI, the Director of Thought Leadership of Agile at Scale programs. So I take more of a holistic view of things. It's been interesting working with Steve and Joshua because we're all kind of interested in how do you improve entire organizations. So, Steve, just give it to you.
Hello, friends of Herbie. Well, that's my trademark greeting. And for those who don't know, Herbie is that little character in the Goal, the business novel of Dr. Goldratt. And why is that so recurring for me? Well, because I use a lot of the theory of constraints of Dr. Goldratt in all my work that goes under the name of TameFlow. I'm the managing director of TameFlow Consulting, and we help companies to improve their performance, especially in knowledge work. So I'm happy to be the host this evening, and that also gives me like the duty to introduce our topic. And I want to talk about technology, technology in socio-technical systems in this knowledge work, and especially in the software field. We are interacting with technology every single day, every minute, and it's become even worse now with all the mobile devices. We are almost slaves of the technology. But technology has also a very important function, because it is what gives all these software companies or software-intensive companies the competitive edge. What will be the next big thing in technology? Who knows? But someone is thinking about that, and sooner or later it will hit you. So it might be good to try to be proactive and to either look at what new technologies are coming around so that we can assess their impact on both our own company and on well, our way of delivering our services to our audience. Or it could also be that we are the innovators, and we all know it. It's so easy to have great ideas. Then, okay, you have to do it, and implementing ideas is a bit harder. But we get a gazillion of new ideas all the time. How can we assess if they are good for the business and for the customer ultimately? Because we always want to serve a customer. Well, this is where I have been looking at Dr. Goldratt's solution. You might know that he's famous for the 5 focusing steps, which derive from the story of Herbie. But he had also other collections of wisdom and questions. In the evolution of businesses, he always tried to find a sweet spot, so to say, a magical balance between the works that you're doing here and now to keep the lights on, which gives like stability to the business. But we all know technology has a best before date. I'm no longer using Windows 95, for instance. I don't know, Al, are you still on Windows 95? No, I don't think so.
Not for a long time.
So you see, technology evolves, and therefore you have to update and maybe anticipate. So that brings us to the second curve, which is like the innovation curve, the growth curve. And these two curves, I continue to intersect, and you have like these waves of innovations coming and going all the time. So if we are in a position to assess a new technology, either that we want to implement or that we want to acquire, how can we do it? And in particular, how can we do it in a manner that is consistent and coherent, that has, so to say, conceptual integrity with the ways of working that you have adopted to manage your internal processes, your way of working. Now, my backdrop is always a theory of constraints, so let's see what Dr. Goldratt came about with. Joshua, yes, thank you for the screen share.
Excuse me, Steve, I want to inject the thought that you speak to when you speak to these things. When we hear technology, and you mentioned like Windows 95, we sometimes think of like software or tools or things like that. Do you also include just new techniques of discovery, like say test first? To me, that's a technology, even if no tool is involved.
Absolutely, because the notion again goes back to the constraint, not the bottleneck. The constraint, that is that single thing that mostly prevents you from achieving whatever you set out to achieve. So if you are addressing some sort of limiting factor, or maybe the most limiting factor, well, then this is consistent with this way of thinking. A technology could also be, or rather, well, you notice the title here, the 6 power of innovation questions. Well, actually, I should go back a couple of slides, but we'll get back to this in a moment. So we are talking about innovation, which not necessarily is technology. It could also be, as often is the case, an innovation in ways of thinking. That's one of my preferred topics, the mental models, and how you look at the world and make your own interpretation. If you update your mental models, you will be able to overcome constraints and limitations that you are currently experiencing. So yes, Al, no, it's all there. But it's particularly useful when you start to look at technology coming from the outside, because that's always where you have the surprises. Internally, you might have the challenges because you're facing something new. You have to figure out how to do it. You don't know how to do it. You have to do research. But when a technology comes from the outside, if you're not quick, well, we all know the story of Nokia, or Nokia, depends on how you want to pronounce it. But they learned that the Apple iPhone was not a toy that just played music and showed images, and it was a very, very harsh lesson. So let me introduce you to, the 6 technology questions. This is the first slide. These are the original questions of Dr. Goldratt. And you want to focus first on trying to identify what is the real power that this technology is providing you. Question number 2 is, where is it overcoming some current limitation, the constraint basically of your reality? How does it eliminate it or vastly reduce it? But that's not enough, because when you introduce new technologies, often the way of working, which I know you care a lot about the way of working, might change. So you might have to change the policies, norms, and behaviors. And oftentimes these policies and norms that you have today are there to bypass, overcome the limitation you have. And therefore, the technology might all of a sudden make your policies, norms, and behaviors completely obsolete. But then what do you introduce? What are the new ways of working that are both enabled and become necessary because of the new technology? And then once the technology is introduced, what additional things come about? Well, for instance, when we went from fax to emails, if anyone remembers the fax, all of a sudden we had lots of empty space in our drawers. We didn't have all the paper there. So that is like a consequence that we changes that are consequential of the innovation. But finally, if we then decide that yes, this is what we want to do, and we have considered all these elements, Goldratt finally concluded, how do we cause the change? What are the steps that we have to really undertake, rolling up our sleeves and get to work to make this happen? So becoming very, very operational. Now, the thing that I have done, which was this other slide, is that I have slightly modified these questions, and I refer to not the technology as a whole, but to like facets, aspects of the technology, the single powers of innovations. And I did this in relation to blockchain technology. So this was actually applied for real. And the questions are almost the same, but we are focusing more on the specific solutions that one aspect of the technology might provide. And of course, we since this is an innovative framing, the last question is now, what are the new opportunities that we are creating? So where can we use this? Well, we can use it, for instance, if we are assessing an investment in a startup. Does the business plan of the startup make sense? Does the technology float the boat, so to say? Or we can use this when we are doing merger and acquisitions, and the acquisition target has some technology that we are interested in. And the same question is there again now, is this technology good for us? And finally, of course, if we do this ourselves, when we have these framing of power of innovations, what I then do is I just list all of them and repeatedly answer those questions. We might come up, in the case of the blockchain, for instance, that we identify a number of powers like digital ownership, decentralization, and so on. I don't go through them, but you see, you're starting to have a map. That's why I call this the powers and opportunities map of what you may or may not do. And what becomes really interesting is that you might connect this, for instance, to the, well, hold on, I must go to the right slide, to the lean startup canvas. For instance, this is a lean startup canvas for a startup in the blockchain space. And we can map the 6 questions for single powers onto the lean startup canvas. So it gives us a very clear way to understand where the single elements are referring to, in this case, the elements of a lean startup canvas. So I don't want to go any deeper in this, just to give you a sense of how the attention to the technology is important. Maybe one slide I should go back. Let me just find it, which is significant, is this one, again, referring to what was happening in the blockchain space. Look at the center, where you see that the current solutions are all manual, they are all physical, they all require human intervention, while the corresponding blockchain solution is all automatic, immaterial, and the work is done by computers. So clearly here you see the impact of what the new technology is doing. It's replacing manual human labor with automated computation. So that's in a nutshell what I have been doing. And because since this is focusing on the constraints that we are addressing, it's entirely consistent with the rest of TameFlow, where TOC, theory of constraints, is at the center of the mental models, the way of thinking. Okay, Joshua, thank you for the screen share. We can start to have conversations and discussions about this. Joshua, any comments? Oh, you're muted. Oral?
Yeah, I was going to say, I keep unfortunately, my connection keeps dropping me on and off. I missed a large part of what you covered.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I have some thoughts that are actually, you kind of reactivated some thoughts I had like 20 years ago about technology. And so if this is
because I said Windows 95.
No, not because of Windows 95. It's not that old, but maybe more like 15 years ago. So, this whole Agile, a lot of people in the Agile camp say Agile is a being, not a doing. And I actually, as somebody once joked, Frank Sinatra had it right. It's do, be, do, be, do, be, do, be, do. You really can't separate them. I think the problem with defining things from a being is how do you verify what that is if it's not through actions? I mean, somebody could say, I'm being agile, and then they yell at people not showing respect. Or a manager can say, okay, you're the team, but I want you to do this. And he's micromanaging. So being needs to show up in doing. I actually do appreciate beingness. Believe me, if I were to tell people my sense of being in spirituality, it would be really way out there. I mean, I'm a Taoist. I believe in spiritual energy. I'm about as far out as you can think if you really get into it. So I understand beingness and all that. I really do, more so than a lot of people. And no judgment. I mean, people do what they do, and that's great. But it has to show up as an effectiveness. Like being can create effectiveness. The energy you take can create things and come from places. So I'm not dismissing that, but it's difficult to get that actually nailed down. And I'll give you an example of something too. There's another issue here, which is how important someone with a good attitude doing the wrong thing is not always better than someone with a bad attitude doing the right thing. And the question is, can someone with a good attitude doing the wrong thing get to learn how to do the right thing, versus if someone with a bad attitude doing the right thing can learn to maybe get a better attitude? It's not symmetric, but it's not like it works one way. And let me give you the thing I actually considered, 18 years ago. So at one point, long time ago, Net Objectives had a staff consultation division that then has since spun out, also a long time ago. And I was speculating. This was early agile. I was a big believer in XP, still am. Test first, paired programming, things like that. And I had actually speculated, I wish I'd spent the money at the time, but I didn't, to run an experiment where I would take on a project with local people working in a cross-functional team, self-organizing, all together, but let them run the way they wanted to, because in those days, I can guarantee you they probably wouldn't be doing XP. Or get a nearshoring, which is what we were using at the time. These were people in our same time zone, but not in the United States. Get someone in nearshoring, and we said, look, we're going to tell you some practices you have to do. You have to do test first. You have to pair. And give them the technology and tell them you can do whatever else you want, but you got to use this technology. And I'll bet, I still believe it, that second group would have done better than the first. I know this runs in the face of everything. I'm going to get death threats and all that. But when people don't do the work right, there's so much waste to it. And doing the work right is the way to get education. Now, be clear here. I'm with Discipline Agile. We're big believers and choose your way of working, and there's no one universal thing. So I wasn't going to give them something that didn't fit the project, but things like test first and things like something contextualized for the project they're working on. I actually believe this distinction between technology and being is maybe artificial, or to some extent. And I'm just throwing this out there. I haven't thought about this in a long time, but I'm very interested in your two's perspective, and people are listening. Please throw things in the chat. I can chat too.
Yeah, well, in the title, I was referring to socio-technical systems. So it's the combination of the human dimension, the human aspect, and the technology aspect. And at the end of the day, technology is created by humans, at least so far. I know we're getting AIs and robots and who knows what else. But that connection is always very, very strong. But you raised another point there, Al, which I think is also significant when you were saying about telling these folks to use like TDD. By the way, I'm also an ex-peer, no X in the sense that I'm no longer coding, but I was into XP as well. So I subscribe to those technical practices. The point is that when you are having someone who might not see the benefit of a technology or of anything, it could not necessarily be the technology, but you're having like a situation where you have conflicting viewpoints. And the slide that I showed you before with the old way of working that was manual and the new way of working that was automated is a natural context for a conflict to arise. The people who might be quote unquote obsoleted will not be happy about this technology. As the candle makers, they lost to electricity. They were not happy about that innovation, but the rest of the world appreciated electricity. So you will have situations where conflicts are a consequence of the innovation, and therefore you need to be able to address and manage this human dimension of conflictuality. And again, that's where Goldratt has brilliant lessons with evaporating clouds and the levels of disagreement, the logical thinking process. Now I am maybe saying many things that the audience might not be familiar with, but they are integral parts of the body of knowledge of the theory of constraints. So again, as we said last time, TOC is not about chasing bottlenecks on the factory floor. It's about assisting human goal-oriented systems in moving towards that goal.
What I'm thinking about here, so I like that. I guess my question is this: is there ever a true separation of, you said, the technology, social technology, the interaction? I think there's always an interaction if you're in a balanced, useful state. If you just, I'm going to do this without thinking about anything, that's probably not good. But going back to my example, it's interesting, like paired programming it specifies a kind of interaction, two people working together, considering different things. You don't just do paired programming like, two people get together. It's actually a dialogue where you have two people working on the same goal, but taking different voices, so to speak. Like, what's the design? What am I doing? The other one, what's the result we're trying to get? And that interaction is specified somewhat by the technique of paired programming. Of course, there are different ways to do paired programming. You can do it as a mentor-mentee relationship. So the socio part might be defined by the context you're in. Test first is an interaction between people who understand what needs to happen and people are going to be building it. Or it can be used as a way to discover what needs to happen. I mean, again, it has different things, but there is an integration of technology and social working that I think is hard to separate. Or if you separate it, you've done an artificial separation.
Yeah, they are not separated at all. And now you mentioned a word that has magic powers: interaction. Why does it have magic powers? Because in the realm of technology, even building the pyramids was a technology, or the Stonehenge. Most physical technologies are very shallow in terms of interaction. There aren't many ways you can use a hammer, even though you can hurt yourself with a hammer. But you will feel the hammer when you hit your thumb, and that's a sort of interaction you will remember. But it's a very primitive way of interacting. When we come instead to digital technologies, we have a whole new dimension where the duality, or we should maybe add a third dimension, becomes very, very tight. And I'm referring, and again, maybe this is way too technical, to Wegener's lemma, where we have the situation of digital technologies that can only be developed and verified through interactive processes. Because when a digital technology is in place, you have an interaction between me as a user and the code, an interaction between the coder and the code, an interaction between me and another user through the code, and lastly, which is maybe the most mind-blowing, the interaction of one piece of code with another piece of code. So there is like a combinatorial explosion of these interactions, which is one reason why we have the effectiveness of agile methods, and in particular test-driven development, because the validation of what the artifact is doing is both confirmed and realized through interaction. You cannot have this sort of technology working unless there is a very intense element of interaction. Unlike other technologies, yes, they might go through testing and so on and so forth, but once the thing is tested, you take it for granted. But we know with software, nothing is granted because maybe some remote library changes somewhere, and even the lead developer doesn't have a clue that changed, and all of a sudden you have a side effect that was induced remotely by someone else. And who discovers it? The user. How? Through an interaction. So the capability to manage the interactions are fundamental in this industry, and they are part of the technology. And that's also going back to the theme. One things to consider when we are looking at innovations in terms of software development, of software innovations. What constraints are we overcoming? But at the same time, are we really aware of all the side effects that the new thing might introduce? And maybe not, but we will discover through interactions.
So I have to admit, I don't remember Wagner's dilemma, although I've heard it. Like, I probably know it, don't remember it.
Well, he gave a mathematical proof that that the validation of software has to go through interaction. So you need interactive methods. It all goes down to computability and the fact that digital has only zeros and ones and cannot represent like the full spectrum of numbers. So you have situations where unwanted side effects are produced not because of a fault in conception or design, but because of an intrinsic limitation of the digital technology. So Wegener's lemma is an extremely powerful thing, and I always refer back to that when I have to explain why do you have to have, for instance, iterations. It's not because of the incrementality. No, the incremental development was always known. Even the pyramids were built one stone at a time. But the iteration is necessary because you are validating through successive interactions. And Wegener's lemma tells you that that's part of the nature of a thing. You cannot have a plan that is rolled out by following the envisioned steps, because every step might change the very substrate on where that plan is unrolling. So it's a very deep and very powerful construct.
What hits me, and it could be because I've got complexity on the brain this last week or two. But when we talk about interactions, it seems to me we're talking about at least two different kinds of interactions. And these are just the two that come to head. One is I'm doing something and I see how it's getting built. So I'm learning, like if I'm building the pyramids, I see it being built, and I'm learning, I'm interacting with the reality I'm creating in a sense. And one of the advantages of digital innovation is I can see it right away. We joked, we had a cartoon once at Net Objectives where it showed a pyramid that was upside down, and the pharaoh's talking to the engineer, and he says, "Oh, perfect, now one small change." And you can imagine this thing being built, with the apex at the bottom, and nobody's paying attention to it. The pharaoh's not paying attention to it. And a waterfall, that'd be a waterfall result, perhaps. But in an agile way with interaction, you are seeing you're doing it wrong, and that actually changes the interaction of the pharaoh to the engineer. So it's not just our understanding is changing about reality, the joint community is changing. And somewhere the question is, where is the real reality of the situation? In other words, I've got an idea of what's going on in my head and there's out in the world. And now something physical, it's easy to say, oh, that's the reality. But really, I believe we create how we think about things. Excuse me. Our experience has a lot to do with how we think about things. Ed Schein said something very powerful. He said, we don't talk about, how do you say it? He said, we don't talk about what we see. We see what we talk about. We don't talk and think about what we see. We see what we think and talk about. And I've seen this. In other words, our filters change. We see everything through our filters of what we think is true. I've done exercises. Actually, it's hard to do it virtually, but I've done an exercise where I do something up at the front of the room with I've done it with as many as 100 people. And I'm totally showing them what they need to do to figure out a problem I'm giving them. And I could have it go for hours without anybody figuring it out. I mean, it's right there in front of them. No tricks, nothing. Except the trick is I'm showing them something else and they're looking at the other thing because that's the way it normally is. So there are two things they're seeing and they're completely filtering out the right answer and they're completely only seeing the wrong thing because of our past history. So when we talk about complexity, when we talk about systems, how much is out there and how much is in here? And then we'll talk about we have in here for everything else. So this is why I'm saying technology is a tool maybe to expose these interactions as well. Good technologies tend to me, this is the heart of agility, is that you and I can talk, but we get instant feedback, quick feedback, not instant, but quick feedback about our own realities and then maybe how we can be effective. So I know I'm just ranting here a little bit or rambling, but I'm interested in if this is making sense and you throw some insights on it.
So let me tell you part of my narrative when I was talking about that blockchain related power of innovations matrix. No, the question was, what is really new about the blockchain? And I said, well, let's take another example, which is totally unrelated. Let's go back in history a long, long time ago when our ancestors were hunters and gatherers. They were roaming the globe, hunting for food, basically. And then, at a certain point, someone smarter than others discovered farming, and the farming innovation was very powerful, but it required something that probably was mind-boggling for the hunters. What was that? It was the boundary stone. So the farmer would put a stone on the borders of his field and say, dare you if you trespass this, I won't be happy. And can you imagine the hunters? They would be scratching their heads, like, what is this? We've always been gone wherever we want, and now because there is a stone, there are thousands of stones in the world. Why should I not be allowed to go past that? It's like a different mental model. It's a different way of seeing. And the stone, even if it's a simple thing that was already there, became a technology the moment that the farmer was attributing to the stone a new significance, the significance of a boundary. In other words, that was the origin of the notion of property rights. So a stone became a token for a property right. But the hunters who didn't have the idea that land could be, possessed, so to say, they couldn't even understand the technology. It was just mind-boggling. How can a stone tell me not to go over where I've always been walking? Well, the blockchain is exactly the same kind of thing. It is defining new kinds of property rights, but most people will end up at the technology point and say, well, no, it's just like a database, only that it's slower, much less efficient. No, it's not. It's a new kind of property right, which is realized through a technology. The parallel with the boundary stone is incredible. It's amazing. It's fitting. And we are in the same situation where many people just don't see the power of the innovation. That's why my framework is called the Power of Innovations framework. And that might require some time before there is a general acceptance of this new concept. So in a way, you're on the right track there, Al, because the innovation often is more in our mind than in the actual thing. The stone was a stone, but the attribution of significance to the stone made it a different thing.
Yeah, but it also, I mean, agreed. It also does something else very powerful, and it leads to a question. So pointing out what it does is the technology actually changed the relationship between people. And they either had agreement or didn't have agreement. The farmers might have said, this is our land, and the hunters might have said, well, no, I'm not abiding by that. So technology, the question then is, what technology sets up the proper relationships and the way we can work together? And this is, again, what I mean, that people talk about technology, and I think when people hear that, they think, when I talk about technology, I'm actually meaning to include the interactions that technology sets up, and I don't think I've been clear enough about that. And I'll give an example. So I had this insight about 10 days ago, and it's one of these things I jokingly call a dinsight. Insight. How could I not have seen that? And what I realized was that I see a lot of people do what looks like command and control. And a lot of people attribute this micromanagement to being command and control, and I'm in my silo and I control it, and you have to follow my rules. But I had this insight where it's not always command and control that's the driver. Fear is the driver that ticks off the command and control. So I'm not saying there's not command and control, but that's not the driver. The driver is fear. And when I saw that, I noticed, people pull in, and we've seen this. I'm sure you've all seen this, that when you're in fear, you tend to worry about yourself, your team, maybe your area. There's a retrenchment, so to speak. And one of the things I'm keen on, as y'all know, is the discipline Agile Value Stream Consultant, we base our large scale approach on the value stream, from the customer through the work and back. But part of that is we use Alexandrian patterns to kind of show the relationship between the pieces. We don't take the pieces and put them together. Rather, we look at the whole and then see how they all relate to each other. So what's interesting when you do that is, instead of like, I'm this role and I have to go look at the framework and see what my role is, or I'm that role and I have to go look at the framework and see what my role is, we actually set up the dynamics of all the people working together based on this value stream. So if I'm a developer team, I'll see what's upstream and like, how do I pull work? Look downstream, like to ops, how do we do DevOps? And it's all about relationships. So technology and relationship, your mental models, as you say, are, I think, inseparable. So the question is, I'm getting to this, I'm not sure I know what the question is. I was getting the background so I could ask a decent question. I think the question is, when we look at our mental models, we should be asking, how do the mental models we use improve the relationships of the people doing the work, so we can not dismiss, but dispel, weaken the lack of safety we feel?
I think the mental models are shaping most of our perceptions of what is out there. They are giving us our reality. It's all very, very much filtered through a lens of subjectivity. And as an example, you mentioned command and control. Now, that is an interesting topic. I don't know if you want to get me started on that one, because we have only 20 minutes. But let me just try to summarize. First of all, the original sense of command or control comes, of course, from military theory. And it has nothing to do with what has become like the acceptation in the Agile vernacular, where it stands for dysfunctional management that wants to boss you around and micromanage and abuse and all the negative things you can think about managers. That's command and control. Command and control originally stands for having the authority and the duty to set the direction towards a goal and to make decisions based on feedback. That is the control. It's like the control you have when you're driving a car, that when you turn the steering wheel, well, you know, if it's a normal utility car, you wait and sooner or later it will turn. But if it's a high performance car, it will turn immediately. That's the sense of control. So command, you decide the direction, and when you have decided, you get the control back, the feedback loop that goes. So that is the original sense of command and control. And it's really sad that the agile world has distorted this notion with a negative connotation. I'm not advocating bad, dysfunctional, abusive management. That must be clear, but it's an error to call it command and control. Now, you mentioned, where does it come from? Many in the agile space say, oh, it's old-fashioned management tied to manufacturing, to Taylor, and also completely misrepresenting Taylor's work. But that's another topic. We'll have another episode on that one. If only managers would drop these old-fashioned ideas and understand, be, as you said before, the agile values, we would all live in a rosy world. No, it's not that simple. And you came up with the other theory here that it's the first time I hear it, about command and control being like triggered by fear. And I think there is some sense there, because when you are in a conventional organization where you have lots of intrinsic conflicts because there is no unified direction towards the goal. I work a lot with unity of purpose and community of trust. Then fear can be an inhibitor and provoke reactions which might or might not be perceived as the bad command and control, but they are perceived like that. It might not be, but they are perceived. Now let me tell me my theory of command and control, which is entirely based on mental models. So suppose that we three are peers we are working together, and someday Joshua, he's always on vacation, so he must be smarter than me and you, Al. Joshua gets promoted to become a manager, and he has to manage me and you, okay? And at a certain point, Joshua needs to make a decision. And we have also grown. We have become heads of our own departments. So we are in two distinct silos. Joshua will ask me, and I will give an answer. Joshua will ask you, and you will give an answer. And Joshua still does not have a clue what to decide. He can use a coin at random and say, okay, let's pick Al's answer. And he communicates that to you. Hey, Al, your idea was good. We'll go with yours. And you will be happy. So, wow, Joshua, he's a great guy. He was promoted, and he's still a good guy. But then Josh will come to me and say, hey, Steve, no, your idea wasn't good. We'll do Al's idea. And what is my reaction? Oh, that Joshua, he was a good guy, but now he's a manager. He thinks he owes the world. He's just bossing me around, and I have just to do what he wants. It's command and control. Now, here we were just me and you. Imagine if we had 20 units. 19 will be unhappy and attribute bad management, quote, unquote, command and control to Joshua, and one maybe would be happy. So why does this happen? Because all these 20 silos have different mental models. They see the world from their perspective, and Joshua, as well as the manager, will see the world from that perspective. And by happenstance, maybe the decisions that he makes are consistent with the mental models and the view of one of the 20 silos. That silo will be happy. All others will perceive command and control. In reality, it's a mismatch of mental models. If all mental models are shared across all the 20 units and with the manager, and they tend towards the goal, command and control does not exist. It evaporates.
How do you suggest making people's different mental models clear to each other? Because personally, I've been trying to do this for Oh, 15 years with no success, very little success.
Yeah, and I was going to ask the same thing. My internet connection finally was stable enough for me to hear that continuous thought. so, so for the first time, I'll get to chime something in. So yeah, if you've got the 20, how do you go about that?
So, and this is really the great teaching of Goldratt, that the premise is that if we are in one organization, or I would say a social body, a social community, if we have a shared goal, so that is number one, agree on the goal. If we share the same goal, there is no conflict that cannot be resolved. And how does Goldratt do that? It's through the logical thinking processes, all those logical constructs that have fancy names like the current reality tree, the future reality tree, and many other trees. And last but not least, the evaporating cloud. The evaporating cloud, which is like the tool that is used to resolve conflicts. And there is also another hierarchy of agreement or disagreement, where well, do we agree on the problem? Yes or no, or maybe. Do we agree on the solution? Yes, no, maybe. Do we agree on the implementation? Yes, no, maybe. Any point there is a diversity of viewpoints, Goldratt will not consider that as a conflict, but simply as assumptions that have not been stated. And the evaporating cloud will let those assumptions become verbalized, become clear, and then when they are clear, identified, they can be challenged. And often by challenging the assumption, you replace it with something else. Technically, it's called an injection, so a new idea. And that injection will typically take care of both my and your need. So we are no longer in conflict. So it's a long description, but all of this is brilliantly covered by the theory of constraints.
So you have mentioned before a number of times that you focus on working on very high performing teams. So what do you do in a situation though where everybody doesn't have that same shared goal, right? And oftentimes we find that if we're not working with particularly high performing teams, right, that makes it so much more complicated.
Well, no, at the end of the day, there are ways to let people in an organization agree on what are the key elements that we can all share. I have some exercises that I do in my workshops where this becomes very evident, but we don't have the time to go through them here and now. But it is a fundamental exercise where you set the foundation and you set the expectation that it is possible to arrive at such a shared understanding and shared goal. And there are many technical aspects from TOC that come into play, not the least all these logical thinking processes, the evaporating cloud, and so on and so forth. So it's not just sufficient to get to that agreement, but then we must also know, well, what do we do now when we have the agreement? Now, why is this so powerful? Why is it that when we have the agreement, we can really resolve all of these conflicts? And yes, you mentioned high-performing teams. Now, this is really a booster for high performance, because imagine, especially in large organization, imagine how much energy is being wasted. Human energy, mental, psychological energy, how much of such energy is being wasted in internal infights, in the budgeting exercise. It's the last man standing who gets the largest slice of the pie. Now, all these internal conflicts, they consume probably, if we use Pareto, they consume 80% of all energy. Imagine if all that could instead be conveyed, routed on resolving the problems that your customers want to get resolved. You will run away from the competition because you got so much more power focusing on the real solutions rather than in the infights. It's part and parcel of creating high-performing organizations. So Al, you seems you're talking, but you're muted.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks.
Okay.
So I have one question, but kind of to be answered by both of you differently. So I was just reflecting on how, I've been talking about mental models and mindsets and stuff when Guy Beaver, Jim Trott, and I wrote a book called Lean Agile Software Development, Achieving Enterprise Agility. I don't know, back in 2008. I had a appendix which talked about principles, belief systems, mental models, and I thought it was fairly profound and cool. And apparently nobody else did. And I guess I could blame me, but I actually just believe people aren't kind of ready for it. I've had this experience for a long time. People don't tend to look at their belief systems because people tend to think they are their belief systems or there's a correlation. Whereas I kind of shed my belief systems and come up with new ones on a recurring basis. Some things tend to stay stable, like lean's been around in my head for, 35 years. But TOC, I totally misinterpreted the theory of constraints when I read the goal. Thought it was brilliant, but had it confined to manufacturing and a linear process. And only recently have I, last few years, have I really understood the difference. It's one of the reasons I appreciate your work, because you've had a lot to do with breaking this up. But it occurs to me that I think I've been stuck in how I work with people with mental models, and that maybe I need to do it differently. So, here's what I'm thinking, and I wonder about both your reactions to this. That maybe making using a Miro board, getting a virtual tool that's there that lists like different aspects of mental models, like complexity. Inherent simplicity by Goldratt is quite different than the way a lot of people look at complexity in Agile with sense making and stuff. Or that's not Agile. There are like 5 sense making models, just the whole idea of sense making. And Goldratt has a completely different perspective. What this whole be or do, what are you looking at? This whole mind micromanagement versus that. So I'm wondering if this is to you. I'll give it to both questions. I'm pointing to you on the screen, Steve, but obviously you don't know that. But so, like Steve, ways to expose these mental models. And Joshua, have you tried this with Miro boards? Because I know you're really expert at virtual whiteboards. I think that might be interesting. Comments from both.
I'll try and make mine really quick before my connection drops again. So yes, it is. And this was something, the other day we kind of touched on when we were chatting, which is to have lots of that types of different types of information on a board where we start painting a particular picture for, the groups of people, the team, or the extended team, so that they're all starting to get a shared understanding of some of these things. So yes, I haven't. It's been showing really good promise.
I think that's the power of Miro is the power of visualization, and we spoke about visualization I think 1 or 2 times ago, and the logical thinking process of Goldratt are literally about drawing trees. Trees, like logical trees, you have necessity logic and sufficiency logic based trees, but you do it on a whiteboard with markers or sticky notes, or now even better with a Miro board, which is like infinite. So I definitely, even if you were in a face-to-face situation and you have access to the whiteboards, I would still today, after the experience with Miro, I would still say let's collaborate on the Miro and project the screen on the whiteboard instead, because the lack of physical delimitation can allow you to literally draw a much larger problem and solution space. And then the other thing that I think, Joshua, you mentioned that, or was it Al last time, that you have this Miro board which is accessible at any time. So you get like asynchronous
Right.
updates. And now if I'm in the middle of the night and can't go to sleep, I maybe get a brilliant idea and I go to the Miro board and jot it down. and then someone else wakes up and say, "Oh wow, something happened while I was asleep, so maybe I should sleep more."
Powerful.
So
to be able to
we are running
that.
towards the end here, right? I think Joshua is talking, but
he's trying. Just
yes.
not getting through the internet. We have a constraint here, I think.
A technology constraint.
Yes. Yeah, well, this is actually about our time. We do try to end at 5 of, so if people have a meeting at the hour, they can get some coffee or something. So I'll let you drop it. This has been actually pretty thought provoking. I'm going to summarize the two things that I'm taking from this. One is really formulate this question of how does technology affect our personal social interactions? And I don't just mean, like we have Skype or Zoom or something like that. And then the other one is ways of exposing mental models. Because to be candid, I realized I just talked about them, but I didn't really try to expose them, make it more of an exploration. So some of the lack of understanding by others was due to my own, here's how you do it, which I will admit is not the only time I've done stuff like that. So anyway, that's my takeaways from this. I think this could lead to some powerful questions, and I think I'm going to set up a board to do this. I'll talk to you about that, Joshua, because you got a lot of experience. You've been doing it even. So hey, I guess next week.
Now that I'm back again, let's get this up real quickly. John Ward will be joining the three of us next week. He'll be talking on a new approach to Agile teams called Agile Lineout, an alternative to Scrum. So looking forward to having John join us. And I can just say, as we're wrapping up, I'm really glad that these are available on replay, so I'm going to have to go back and watch all I missed today.
Yeah, it might be a different time. It might be earlier because he's in the UK, so this would be 8 his time. He might be willing to do that. He might move it up a little bit.
Okay, so I think we've gone through quite a bit, and it was a great conversation. So we'll be back like in 1 week.
1 week.
Very good. Question for you, Joshua, because I see Lancer asked, is there a way to save this chat stream?
The chat stream shows up in LinkedIn. If you go to where the live event, you can basically watch it on replay. All the comments are within that, I'll make a posting on LinkedIn with it as well. I'll address that on a LinkedIn post.
Yeah,
on it as well.
One other thing that I realized, just Vicky's comment, I always leave these sessions with lots to think about. I do too. We should have some way where people can ask questions between sessions. I would suggest if you have a question, just make a LinkedIn post and tag Joshua, Steve, and me on it. Just your own post. Say, hey, and just put our names in it. If I got a tag on a post, I always look at it, because it'd be nice to keep this conversation going. These are just as much about exploration. That's what I love about these. We might talk 5 minutes before we go on camera, but none of this is scripted. We're just talking ad hoc, and I think that's what makes it fun, because it's kind of cutting edge thought process, and we don't have to produce something, but that's where innovation and creation comes from. So if you've got questions, just post something on LinkedIn. Connect to us. I always love to connect with people. And if you disagree, especially connect with us and tell us you disagree. That's where the learning takes place. Learning takes place with disagreement. I love disagreement. I just like it to be respectful. I like it to be where you talk about the issues, not the people. So I won't engage if you start talking about me, but I will engage if you tell me why my ideas are wrong, because that's how I learn.
Right.
Okay. All good. See you next
week. It's all about the interactions, as we said, and let's extend them to the LinkedIn sphere so people can tag us, and we pick that up.
There's a picture of my kitty trying to interact with some birds. Okay.
Okay. See you next week.
Bye.